We're going to put the story somewhere in the West. So, of course, Vegas. I mean, what is more iconic when you think of crazy things that you could do in the West?
I think that was really the inspiration for the story, in a lot of ways, was looking back at the history of Vegas.
We really think of it as a side story. In a lot of ways, we're revisiting stuff from the original 2 games, but it stands on its own.
The first thing our creative lead and our project director did was they sat down and they sort of examined what sort of themes they wanted to explore in New Vegas.
Every Fallout game pretty much starts with war. War never changes. And the idea behind that is really that humanity has this unending appetite for killing each other.
Thematically, if you're going to do a game about Vegas, you have to deal with the theme of greed. And so that's something that kind of suffuses the game.
We've tried to do a lot of reversals with the title, so sometimes we're going to show you why war is absolutely necessary.
Fallout New Vegas is a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. It's set a couple of hundred years after a cataclysmic nuclear war between the US and China, and it takes place at a time when the city of New Vegas is actually being rebuilt.
What ties the story in is the themes of Fallout. It's always centered around water. Where are people getting water? And in case, you know, there's a big area right around Vegas that has a lot to do with water.
Hoover Dam plays a massive role in the game. Hoover Dam is like the pot of gold that everybody is fighting over, because in this post-apocalyptic age, to have something that can produce electricity and also water is worth, you know, everything.
Fallout 3 starts with you being born, and you're a baby, and you go through your young adulthood until you leave the vault. In New Vegas, we wanted to say you start the game in a very Vegas sort of cliche style almost. You are shot in the head and dropped in a shallow grave, so it starts with essentially your would-be death.
After you're shot and left for dead in a grave, you know, you might have some desire to go see what the whole murdering business was about and why he wanted you dead in the first place.
In the course of trying to resolve that one conflict, you get pulled into larger events. So in this case, you're trying to find the people that killed you and what they were trying to get from you. In this case, it was a package you were carrying. So, of course, as you go around, you find out that what you were carrying is centrally tied into this major conflict in the area between New California Republic and Caesar's Legion and Mr. House, who's the guy that sort of runs the strip in New Vegas. Player freedom is very important in the Fallout series, and when we allow the player to basically have a choice in what they do and how they do it, by leaving the plot open in a way that basically they're just learning what's going on in the world, it gives them a lot more freedom in how they want to learn that information.
The leader was a New Vegas type. Typical city boy. He had a bunch of great cons with him, probably hired guns.
A lot of the story that comes out of a Fallout game is through the player's own experiences. What you want to do is get them a lot of hooks to adventure with and sort of bounce their own ideas off of and their own experiences.
Like a lot of role-playing games, but I would say even more with Fallout, it's about choice. You know, do I want to be the nice guy? Do I want to be the bastard?
I mean, they can go through the game just blowing everyone away at a moment's notice. They can level whole towns. They can kill everyone all the way up to the very end of the game.
And we also want to make it possible for those that want to be very pacifistic and more speech-oriented and try to be a good and all-around good person.
They can just leave the story, go off into the desert, go into some crazy vault, come out, pick it up again. They can shortcut parts of the story. Really, I said, it has to start like this, and it has to end with some big conflict between humans about very human concerns. But where you go along the way is sort of what we've been defining over the course of the development process.
Another thing about the Fallout quote-unquote story is what you're trying to do is just make sure that the characters you present in those environments, you want to give them a lot of depth. You want to give them a lot of purpose.
There are too many characters for me to count how many we're introducing.
This game is not, it's set in the future, but it's set in an alternate future. So we can take a lot of inspirational sort of figures from Vegas history and use them as sort of ideas for new characters or main antagonists. So one of the major characters, Benny, is sort of like, if you look at his sort of visual look, he's kind of inspired a little bit by Bugsy Siegel.
Ring-a-ding, baby, ta-ta.
We have a kind of enigmatic overlord of New Vegas named Mr. House, who is patterned after the historical Howard Hughes.
Now, because of your carelessness, Benny has fled the strip.
Caesar is the head of this rather frightening faction called Caesar's Legion that's looking to conquer this region.
I want Mr. House knocked out of the game. A quick 1-2 punch.
These bizarre characters and their sort of twisted things that they do, it's a really big part of the setting, and it's important that Even though we have these terrible situations that people are in, they're punctuated by these moments of bizarre humor.
Please don't do no harm to me, mister. At least the way it's not my face. All I got left is my rugged good looks.
Because the people you meet at different points in the game can actually join you as companions and actually fight alongside you, that sort of gave us a really strong opportunity to have them reinforce the story.
People are really going to enjoy our companions. Raul is very distinctive. He's a ghoul that has been traveling up from Mexico for like hundreds of years, basically, and just living in the desert. And so he has all these crazy stories to tell and really interesting personality.
I'm not much use besides being a portable encyclopedia, really. I guess you could use me as a packed Brahmin.
People really enjoy being part of certain factions in games, participating in the faction politics, and using their influence within an organization to sort of change the game world.
You have these large factions that you're really going up against with very different desires. Like one is just, I just want to take over the world. One is, I want Vegas to survive and me always on top.
They can side with the New California Republic in the war effort. They can side with Caesar's Legion. They can choose to support Vegas, or my personal favorite is that you sort of blaze your own destiny, and depending on the alliances you form with these factions, that sort of determines the future and fate of the world.
The environment is genuinely reacting to what you do as the player. You have a pretty extraordinary amount of control over the outcome of the game.
The one thing about Fallout's always done is really kind of had fun people acting in it. And with Fallout 3, it really continued. And so we want to make sure we're still doing that. And obviously, you have Ron Perlman coming back.
Ron Perlman has been the voice of Fallout for so long, it was kind of like, well, of course, he's going to be the narrator.
You are a courier, hired by the Mojave Express.
It's nice to be working on this same character for this many installments over this span of time.
The legate is crowned as the new Caesar.
We really took it character to character and just looked for who would really be the best voice for the role.
The man who tried to murder you, who's voiced by Matthew Perry in the game. This guy is the leader of a gang called the Chairmen.
I play Benny, who is a very driven, kind of rat pack type guy.
Baby, you can't just leave me tied up. Those Legion boys will put me on a cross for the mess you made, if I'm lucky.
He's really, really enthusiastic and a genuine fan, and he was really easy to work with. You know, he seemed to really get the idea behind the character.
Any questions you got, I'll answer.
Fallout is just bigger and smarter than any game I've played before. There's like just amazing amounts of things to do, and I like the idea that you can, you know, sort of pick what you're going to say to somebody and go on all these quests, and it's just this gigantic world that seems sort of endless.
Like I said, baby, all Benny needs is a stealth boy and a bobby pin.
I also, you know, have gone on dates and stuff too. Like I'm not just a moron who just plays video games. I just want to get that in there.
You'd do that for me, baby? Don't tease me if you don't mean it.
The DJ of Radio New-Vegas is Mr. New-Vegas, and it's voiced by Wayne Newton.
Howdy, folks, it's Mr. New-Vegas, and I have a good feeling about all of you listening.
He's always really upbeat. He always is very pro-Vegas, and always has something good to say about what's going on.
Moving on here, this will be line 2.
Well, you know what that means, folks. Time for some news. Of all the things that I have done in my career, and I've done one or two, this has been the one thing that I have looked forward to, because it was so out of the realm of what I have done in my career. This is Mr. New-Vegas wishing you ladylike luck tonight. I didn't have anything to do with being called Mr. Las Vegas. It was just the fact that I worked here so much and it wouldn't leave, that somewhere, somehow, one of the writers said, well, this has got to be Mr. Las Vegas. Want it again?
Yeah, that was great, but just one more time for the safety.
Hey, we've got some news for you coming right up.
We were lucky enough to get Felicia Day to be one of our Brotherhood of Steel members, which is fantastic, and it makes my nerdly heart glow.
Recording Felicia Day has been just a joy because she's so enthusiastic and she's so excited.
There's got to be something we can do. Veronica is a scribe for the Brotherhood of Steel, and she's sort of sardonic. She's really bright and also likes to punch things. So she's got everything going on for her, really. They need me, and I'm not going to abandon them. That's what I actually like about the character, is that she's a rabble-rouser, but it's for the good of everyone. She really wants to improve everyone's life, and she's willing to buck the system to get it done. When I read it, I read the copy, I was like, oh, this is great. I just don't even have to be anything but a sassy me. It really sounds like it could be a good fit, doesn't it?
The character that I voice, his name is Arcade. He's a doctor. You have the option as the main character to befriend Arcade.
I honestly didn't expect you to say that. When I talked to you about Daisy and the others, you seem to put a lot of value and loyalty to the past.
I've made it very clear to the powers that be, I'm a gamer. I'd like to do voices for your games. I'll have friends who aren't gamers, and they do voices. I'm like, that's so unfair. Like, I actually care about this, and you're the one who got to do the job? Bubkiss.
I need to make a stop before I settle in. I'll be back in a while. Thanks again for your help. It means a lot to me.
Cool. Yeah, great. Hey, great, man.
Marcus is a mutant, first of all. He's been around for a lot of years, and he's aged over the years, but he's still mutant-like. And he is sort of like the sheriff of Jacobstown, which is near New Vegas.
If NCR or anybody else is looking for an excuse to attack Jacobstown, they're not going to get it from us.
With René Aubergenois, from his very first line, he got the character, he got the tone, he got the delivery.
Mr. House, he's a very strange and enigmatic character.
Give me 20 years, and I'll reignite the high technology development sectors. 50 years, and I'll have people in orbit.
His hope is to reignite and reinvigorate this world.
Just in awe of his talent, because he's such a voiceover pro.
Now that you've arrived at your destination, what do you make of what you see?
Some say he's a man, others a machine. I don't care. He's in the way.
My word is law. I'm an extremely powerful character. Violence is how I rule.
Walk away if you want, but if you do, he's going up on a cross.
Is there anything old Vic can do you for?
If I find my way into a voice, a sort of a person will appear that doesn't sound like me and it doesn't think like me. That's always when it's the best, because it surprises me, it surprises them.
Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit if it ain't my old friend from Good Springs.
I can throw the gun at him if you want, boss. Raul is like a very smart old ghoul. He's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience, you know, so he uses it sparingly, but he's pretty sharp. It was early on. We didn't know just how serious it was out there.
Not too long ago, they took Nelson and Searchlight. They got some camps on the eastern shore of the Colorado, and the monstrosity on the hill across the lake, that's for Caesar.
Mr. Christopherson, who's got an amazing voice, very thick and gravelly and really fun to work with.
Just keeping that dam secure and operational day-to-day is enough work for one person.
Every officer I ever talked to, or every soldier, you know, it probably influenced some of my delivery on this.
So this will be lines 1 through 7, and it'll be take 1 whenever you're ready.
Rangers, this is the chief. I know I can ramble on sometimes, but I need you to listen close for the next minute or so.
I hope players play this game, and I want them to be fully immersed in the world, and I want them to really feel each character when they're speaking to them as a totally different individual.
Yee-haw! Ain't that party?
A lot of what we had to make sure that we did with the art style was to, in essence, make it still feel like the post-nuclear world that it was. And that is the kind of the weird 50s, but 100 years after the 50s, if the 50s just stayed the 50s, and then bringing in this idea of Vegas.
Josh had one of the first team meetings, and he talked about Vegas as being one of his ideas, but more importantly, that it'd be the Rat Pack era. And when he said that, then I was just joyous, because it's just great aesthetics at that time.
When we started the game, there were a few things aesthetically that we knew we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that the architectural style of homes, and as well as the casinos, either reflected 50s style from the Vegas era, or it reflected an even earlier time, more like the settlers of the West.
But it's all about Vegas. And so we want to make sure that we have this feeling of sort of this neon, and again, it feels like you're going in there and you're playing around with the mobsters, you're playing around with the Rat Pack.
So much of Fallout is bleak. Everything's been blown up in Fallout for the most part, but the Las Vegas Strip is unique in that no nuclear weapons hit it. So when you go in, you're immediately struck that this is really one of the last places that still feels like old civilization.
Our team, I think, got up to, including animators and myself, we're about 22. We have a lot of great people here, character artists, we have concept artists, world builders, prop artists, and they all have different backgrounds. We have folks like Brian Menzie, who's got a long history with the franchise, but then we have folks like myself who are new. So I think the combination of the different experiences really brought the quality bar up. It takes a lot of work and a lot of people. Usually what we try to start off with is just a general idea of what are the main things we're looking to see in different parts of the world. There's tons of images out there, so a lot of it was just looking at the strip in the early 50s and early 60s just to see what was different about it then.
Joe Sanabria had a pretty good lock on the style of Vegas itself and the casinos. I wanted to sort of immerse myself more in especially the desert sort of style. I took a motorcycle trip through the desert, basically going all around the outskirts of Vegas. Traveling by motorcycle, you get a lot more opportunity to sort of see the area around you. This is just a different feeling from driving in a car, I think. And I just went all around there and I took pictures. I sort of paid attention to the type of flora that was really distinctive. Obviously, you have Joshua trees and then certain types of cacti or wildflowers and things like that. It was basically just a nice inspiration for, you know, just the kind of feeling of being out there. I try to take a lot of opportunities to see what Vegas looked like from different positions. You know, what does it look like when you're coming up from I-15, or what does it look like when you're way up in the mountains west of the valley? It was a nice way to see the environment and get a feel for what it was like. We wanted to make sure that this environment felt like a Fallout setting, but we also wanted to make sure that it was a distinct shift from the Capital Wasteland. You know, this is very, very far away from the DC area, and it's such an important part of the game, that feeling of exploration and looking around. We wanted to make sure that there was a distinct shift.
One of the biggest differences is the lighting in the Southwest. Artists come from all over the world to try and paint and photograph in this kind of light that we have down here. So that's the biggest difference right off the bat.
It doesn't need to be sort of the more kind of blues and grays of DC. This is more the warm colors of the Southwest. You kind of blend all those things together within a blue sky instead of a gray sky, and you get a very different sense of the world.
The scope of this game is massive. You have basically a city in the middle of this area, and then the territory stretches all around the city and does stretch out all the way to Boulder City and to the dam.
When doing Vegas, we didn't want to neglect any of the surrounding areas around Vegas. We wanted to make sure that we had Fremont Street realized, and we have a location called Freeside in the game before they even hit Vegas. And I think once they get a taste of that, they're going to be suitably intrigued to go, okay, well, if that's Freeside, hell, I wonder what Vegas is going to be like.
The Vegas that we were representing was really classic Vegas. This is something that dovetails nicely with the general aesthetic of the Fallout series as a whole.
Everything to do with the Strip is a big artistic playground. One of the strengths we saw about being able to use Vegas as a location is because all those casinos have their own individual themes. It's like a big amusement park the size of a city. And not only do designers have a lot of fun doing quests for those areas, but artists have a fantastic time going, you know what? We can just play around with this location because that's what Vegas is all about.
I was working on the designs for the individual buildings, the keystone ones, the ones that the families or factions are associated with. So Lucky 38 was the first one because it's the most prominent one. From there, I went to the Ultralux and then Tops.
Each of those casinos had its own style that we defined for it. Its own color palette, its own particular slice of Googie style or Art Deco in some cases.
I think we really knew that we kind of hit the look and the feeling of Vegas when we started putting the signs in. So, and I don't know why that was one of the key things, because you can have a big hotel, but it kind of doesn't feel like Vegas unless you have those giant signs.
When you go into these places, they still look like things that have been rebuilt. This is still a world where people have to deal with certain material realities, and they're in the middle of the desert, pretty far away from anything else. So there's a lot of stuff that looks like it has been repaired, been remade, but it's not brand new. But then also you can see off to the sides in certain patches of the Strip, you'll see just whole casinos that are just hulking ruins that are sort of blocked off. You know, that's to show again, like, you know, this place has been screwed up for about 200 years.
We also wanted to make sure there's a certain energy about the Strip too. So when you get past the Great Wall that surrounds Vegas and you actually get inside the city, you feel that same sort of energy that you feel from Las Vegas in real life.
It's almost not just the art, it's sort of really focusing on sort of that feeling and making sure that it feels like a 24-hour city like it does in real life.
When I take pictures or give reference and then say, I kind of want to like it like this, I'm kind of going to want to like this, it's very nice to see the artist come back with something that's even better than what I had imagined in the first place. I think people are really going to dig how different it is from the Capital Wasteland and how we sort of captured the feeling of the Mojave.
People who I knew who'd never played role-playing games and certainly had never played Fallout, curse them, they picked up Fallout 3 and started playing it. Had a fantastic time, which, you know, kind of surprised me because I always considered Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 to be very much a role-player niche market. Fallout 3 kind of bridged that gap where it's like, you know what, it's easy for you to get into this game, and once we've got you trapped there, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of things for you to do, and we've got you hooked.
We wanted to make sure, when looking at the mechanics for the game, that we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. A lot of people like Fallout 3. A lot of people like Fallout 3. So the experience should feel familiar to them. There were places where we could give them more options and more interesting sort of tactical choices to make, whether that's in the role-playing game system or in the combat system or just in general in the game. We wanted to explore the ways that we could do that.
The whole premise of Fallout is about giving the players at least 3 ways to solve each quest. Like, one of the big strengths of Fallout is it has a very detailed character creation process, and that process, right down to each individual skill, individual perks you've chosen, the game world specifically reacts to those things. That's kind of one of the design philosophies for the franchise.
I think that people are going to notice in the conversations that we try to let the player in on what the mechanics are a lot more. When skills are being called on or when reputation is being called on, instead of hiding things from the player when they don't qualify to do something, we always show the player to let them know that there's something there. By highlighting those things, the player knows, like, oh, okay, so if I read the skill magazine or if I come back in another level or if I take this chem, maybe I can make this check.
There's a lot of angles to this caper, complexities aplenty.
When it comes to our faction mechanics, we're a lot more transparent about when that is triggering something. So when you go to a location and someone says, hey man, you can't come in here, it'll say like NCR reputation. You know, it's like, we don't know who you are, or you've killed our officers in the past, like we're not gonna let you into this place. Those sort of mechanics, I think, are gonna be a lot more transparent than they've been in really any Fallout game.
When it comes to going through combat and just having a lot of fun with combat in Fallout New Vegas, we wanted to take what was in Fallout 3 and really expand upon it. And so we've kind of done a lot of tweaks and changes and things like that to really kind of expand the fun of sort of this blend between almost like a turn-based game, which you can do through VATS, or, you know, just being straight FPS.
If the person wants to play the game just purely as a shooter, I do think that they will find it in some ways easier. They will find the responsiveness a lot easier to deal with.
We've basically overhauled the way combat works and how damage is calculated and how targeting works. It may appear subtle at first, but I think people will appreciate how much more responsive and natural it will feel to those that actually prefer action games.
The cinematic kill cam that you get when using the VATS in Fallout 3, for example, which a number of people like, you know, watching the critical hit. With New Vegas, you can actually still get those cinematic kill cams outside of VATS if you're doing really special moves with your weapons.
VATS is an amazing system that allows you to kind of play this immersive first person, getting shot missiles and bullets and laser beams coming at you from every angle in real time, and you can immediately go to this system, VATS, and you feel like you're in control and you can play the RPG. It's just a great kind of melding of how people play games now versus sort of, you know, hinting back to how we used to play.
Even a really skilled player, they still have to play the role-playing game's statistical system. So they have to advance their character, get more hit points, get better equipment, and then they can tackle those challenges. If they try to take a low-level character with low-level equipment, into a high-level area occupied by Deathclaws or Nightkin super mutants, they're gonna die. Like, it's really, really hard and challenging. When a person comes up to a conflict, we want them to go through a thought process. It doesn't have to be a long or exhaustive one, but when they say like, do I really want to go in there? Like, you know, they look at their stuff and they're like, okay, I'm gonna go for it. We also wanted to make sure that the mod system for our weapons was very easy to access and use. We went through a number of things where we thought, well, you gotta go to a workbench and you gotta do this and you have to have this skill. But when we came down to it, it's like, well, if you buy these things, you wanna put them on your weapon right away and use them. So when you go into your inventory, you just look at the weapon, you press a button, it shows you the mods for that weapon, you attach them and you back out. So it's a very easy to use system, and it's mostly about just the player deciding, do I wanna spend the money on this mod and do I think it'll be useful?
What we try to do in New Vegas is give each of the melee weapons that you have in the game their own particular special move depending on what your melee skill is. The golf club, for example, has its own special ability called 4, where you can just sort of tee off and then do a massive knockback attack on an opponent if you have a high enough melee skill. They're incredibly easy moves to pull off with the controls. They're just a little option that pops up, and then once you fire them off, they cost a little bit more action points than a normal attack, but the results are definitely worth it.
We want them to come in and go like, wow, this feels familiar, but sharper and nicer, and it feels like I have more options, because we don't want people to fall into a sense of boredom like, I've already seen this before. So they get into it, it's easy to get into, and then they go, oh,
In Fallout, and then in Fallout New Vegas in particular, we really wanted to have sort of a lot of groups that people could interact with.
Factions are really important to us. We didn't want to make it something where it was black and white, where you have this small group of good people against a small group of bad people. It's this very complex mixture of these different people and these different factions.
The player has a lot of control over what he gets to do in the New Vegas area. He gets to influence what happens to an entire region, and in order to have that kind of influence, he needs to side with one of the factions and sort of decide where he tips the balance.
It's all about war, and that's what Fallouts have been about, is war, and so how we're really showing that is war between these factions.
We want the player to sort of have that hesitation when they're like, where do I really stand with these organizations? Like, is it really the right thing to back X, Y, or Z? And even if I go off on my own, what does that mean for everyone who's living in the world of New Vegas?
We have 3 primary factions, one of which is the New California Republic.
Which is this big, sprawling government that's gotten too big for its own good. It's so big, it can't control its own territories, it can't police its own laws, it certainly can't protect its own citizens.
We felt it was really important to include the New California Republic because that was a faction that was developed in some of the earlier titles.
NCR is established after the events of Fallout 1 and has a major presence in Fallout 2. And in Fallout 3, they're like a early 20th century United States frontier government. They're pushing eastward, trying to soak up as many resources as they can, annex as much territory as possible.
It's basically a nascent nation state. It is doing its best to resurrect this idea of representative government. It's also, at the same time, a corrupt bureaucracy.
On the other hand, approaching from the east, looking to lock horns of the New California Republic, is this huge army of slavers called Caesar's Legion.
Which is this terrifying war band of slaves that has come from out of the Grand Canyon area that is just conquering everything in its path.
I just like this idea that we've been able to kind of take this Road Warrior-esque feeling and make it Roman.
These guys have this armor that is built out of football pads and catcher's gear and stuff like that, but it kind of looks like Roman lorica segmentata, which is the traditional armor of the Roman legions.
And the guy who runs it, Caesar, he's just in it for, I want to rule the world.
And Caesar is hardcore about using certain aspects of the Roman Empire as a model.
I think it's a really cool organization just visually to deal with, and then also once you get into the nuances of their culture, it's a kind of interesting thing. NCR and Caesar's Legion are sort of stalemated at the Colorado River and at Hoover Dam.
Hoover Dam is one of our signature locations in the game, and to be honest, it's what everyone is fighting over. It's still able to provide power for part of the region, which is its big draw.
NCR controls the dam, but Caesar is right across from it. And everyone thinks that they're just gearing up for a big assault.
Time is fast approaching when my legion will assault the great dam and invade the west.
NCR troops are coming into the area. Caesar's legion is being reinforced from the east, and everyone's just wondering, like, well, when is somebody going to do something? And of course, that's where you come in, is because you kind of help determine when this showdown happens. Of course, Mr. House is playing into it as well, because Mr. House doesn't want NCR to win, ultimately, because he doesn't want them to take control of the Strip.
But that's not going to happen, because you're going to work for me.
The general idea is that we have the three major factions, Mr. House, NCR, and Caesar's Legion, but then there are all these sub-factions like the Great Khans, the Powder Gangs, the Kings, the Boomers, the Followers of the Apocalypse, and the player can go to those groups and try to shift alliances.
There are literally 125,000 factions in Fallout New Vegas. We're probably gonna have to cut some of them. There's the NCR, there's Caesar's Legion, there's the PTA, Mickey Mouse Club, Alcoholics Anonymous is in there right now.
Each of the factions has their own style about them. Like the Rangers have a very distinctive style in terms of the dusters, and the Chairmen, the gang that runs the tops, you know, they have a very Rat Pack kind of feel about how they dress. We've actually leveraged that in the game mechanics too, in terms of if you actually wear those outfits in the game, people will recognize you as members of those factions and either fortunately or unfortunately react accordingly.
One feature we've added for Fallout New Vegas is the concept of being able to disguise yourself as a member of a faction, even if you're working against them, so you can put on like a military uniform and sneak into a military base.
We wanted to make the player feel like the factions were well-grounded, they had very believable motivations.
We want the player to experience those factions. We want them to know what politics are at stake and what ideologies these organizations represent.
So when they choose what factions they want to work with, it's based on something more than just a gut, they're good, they're evil reaction. So if you support Caesar, or if you support NCR, or if you help the Great Khans or the Kings, it's going to make a big difference. You can decide, you know what, I don't think any of you are really particularly well suited to be running this place, so I'm gonna fix that. That's where you essentially are either the active champion of Vegas, or you basically just said, it's anarchy now. Our audio designers have put a lot of effort into sort of changing the sound. Part of it is because our environments are so open and there's so much desert involved, they wanted to make sure that they had distant sounds and close sounds.
What we do is we take the Fallout 3 weapon assets and we've repurposed them so that they sound a little more like they're in the environment of Fallout New Vegas. So you hear the rapport of the sound bouncing off of the different spaces and in the mountains in the background and all that.
They did a lot of desert sound recording, and it really makes the gunfights and stuff especially feel very different.
I went out to Azo Borrego Desert National Park a couple months back, and we're just out there. It's dead silent. There's no one around for 30, 40 miles at the very least. We're out there digging through the rocks and causing rock slides down there.
They've also put a lot of effort into shaping the sounds of the desert, and it can be very unnerving walking around because you hear these like little crinkles and rock shifting and things like that. Really, they want to make sure that there's a very strong reactive element to where you travel, especially with the music too.
When it comes to the music of Vegas, it's sort of almost like the contrast between the world that we're going to get to run around in. It's the desert and it's what's going on there, and it's the Strip. And those are two big things that we almost had to think very differently about.
Well, we're working with Enon Zur again, and Enon was really excited about the sort of shift in locations.
I feel that going on this game was sort of like a coming back experience, but also a whole new one.
He's been working with Scott Lawler on a bunch of actually kind of experimental sounds to go into our music.
We got together, Enon and myself, and we talked through really what we wanted to do different with this game and how we wanted to differentiate it from Fallout 3.
Me and Scott had a lot of discussion before we started. It's like, okay, so, we really want to do this Western style, but it should be decadent, it should be twisted, it should be scary. I think that the choices went more and more toward string quartet.
Reasons we chose that is I wanted the score to be very textural and have this sort of grit to it that you can really get from those close mic'd instruments as the rosin moves across the strings. When the player's moving around, they don't feel that the music is just playing without purpose. It always sort of evolves with the action and devolves with the action as well.
Took a lot of brainstorming, not only the way the music needs to sound, but also the way the music is going to be construct and deconstruct in a way that it will follow the player, but then in a new way.
When there's no one around, it's still there and it's got this very low, ominous tone. Enemies enter the area, layers sort of build upon the piece, and as you get into battle, it sort of builds further.
But then we have to take it into Vegas.
The strip itself will be a very interesting challenge because we want to, of course, have the ambient sort of feeling, but also once you get into the strip, a lot of the radios in that environment are playing Radio New Vegas, which has Mr. New Vegas, which is Wayne Newton, and we'll have sort of classic songs of the era.
It really just kind of went from there, and it was smooth, and working with Enon was an absolute pleasure. He came up with amazing pieces. It was exciting to come to work and look at my inbox and find, these amazing pieces of music every day.
People are understanding that music for computer games is something that needs to be a very, very high level. I feel the pressure. I feel the demand. But for me, it's just fueling me. It's not really, scaring me.
We've been very fortunate to have the best actors in the world, some of the best musicians in the world coming in, best composers in the world, and the best sound designers. And all these things have come together to really create a soundscape that I'm very proud of. It achieves the goals that we really set out for this project.
One of the things that we try to do is think about both technology that people would make or utilize in the new world, or things that are pre-war that people are trying to get working now that they're sort of putting the pieces back together.
Obviously, Fallout has the whole, what people in the 1950s viewed the future to be like, which, immediately becomes a huge playground for, oh, let's try this kind of blaster, this kind of laser weapon, this kind of energy weapon.
It's not microchips, it's vacuum tubes. It's not hard corners, it's rounded corners. It's the ray gun instead of the M16.
So one of the first things the player's going to encounter in the opening area of Good Springs, he was actually helped out of his early grave by one of the new robots we have in the game, which are called Securitrons. They themselves are sort of this curious blend of sort of sci-fi, crazy technology, yet they have the Fallout twist to them. This huge, hulking monstrosity, the track wheel that spins around as it's going across the landscape.
Instead of a head, they have a little computer monitor that's sort of right on their chest. And based on the personality that Mr. House wants them to portray, because Mr. House invented them, they'll switch the sort of cartoon image. So it might be an image of a cowboy, Victor, and Victor's the guy who rescues you at the beginning of the game.
Howdy, partner. Might I say you're looking fit as a fiddle?
When you see that on the video screen, it kind of like disarms you for a second. You're having a friendly conversation with this very large robot that could potentially level an entire city block. And the contrast there is, I think one of the fun things that just makes Fallout Fallout. Some of our companions are pretty heavily tech-based, and the nice thing about them too is that you get a chance to modify their technology over the course of the game. And I'm not talking about just repairs and upgrades. For example, Eddie, the sort of floating iBot that you encounter early on in Prim, he has a lot more depth than it may seem from his initial beep-boop conversations that you have with him.
I think it's really important that you have a Pip-Boy, not just for the interface reasons, but it's very Fallout-y. You start with a Pip-Boy and you start with a vault suit, but they're given to you by the doctor who stitches you back up. And he says, I'm an old man, I'm settled here, I don't need this anymore, but if you're going out there looking for the guys that did this to you, you're gonna need something like this.
There was a lot of guns, and there was a lot of fun guns in the first game, but we've added so many more.
And some of those definitely range from the crazy 50s sci-fi feel to the more contemporary, you understand why that gun is cool because it's a grenade machine gun. And you understand the machine gun that shoots grenades is probably pretty awesome.
We have a little 9mm submachine gun. It looks like a World War II grease gun, like sort of compacted, and that's a really cool, distinctive little weapon.
The Ranger Sequoia, which is this massive ornamented revolver that only elite Rangers have. It fires like rifle rounds. It's very powerful.
We wanted to make sure that energy weapons had a very distinct feeling from guns. We wanted there to be something mechanically different about them so that the player had a different type of experience while using them. So we introduced this thing called the Recharger Rifle. And the Recharger Rifle, you don't have to carry ammo for. It recharges it automatically. But it doesn't do it as fast as you can shoot it. You have to kind of pace out how you fire it. Also, we leaned more towards Western-themed weapons, so we have more revolvers, single-action revolvers like a .357. We also have lever-action rifles and shotguns, which are pretty entertaining to use.
Fallout New Vegas really lets you kind of pick a specialty when it comes to a weapon and play it all the way through. And still get, of course, the great thing with eyeballs exploding out of people's heads and all that kind of stuff. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but I enjoyed it every single time.
One of the big centerpieces is Helios 1. We have this company in the Fallout universe that's been around for a long time called Poseidon Energy. And a lot of their projects are seemingly benevolent or seemingly just sort of general energy projects, but they often have a sinister application. When you go into it, what you can eventually learn is it's actually powering these terrible lasers called the Archimedes laser system. And eventually you can get like this little ray gun called Euclid's Sea Finder. And all it's doing is it's finding the C point on a triangle so it can shoot an orbital laser down at whatever you shoot at. This ridiculous little teeny ray gun that you go around and go, meep, and then just it blasts this huge area. It's not an understatement to say that the Strip is Vegas.
Vegas, 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 Vegas.
Where do you go to find what's here? It's maybe the only place of its kind in the world.
When you get to Las Vegas Boulevard and you look down the street, you have to say, I'm in Vegas. And so that's very, very important for us. Getting that look right was very important for us.
I think the Strip is going to be the thing for me. It's where we put the most amount of work in terms of design.
The scope and scale of the Strip is just something new. I mean, it's huge.
We want to make it big and huge and giant casinos and giant neon signs and tons of people milling about and make it feel like I'm actually on the Strip in real Las Vegas.
What we wanted to do was make sure that we captured a lot of the elements of Vegas that people today in the real world are excited about and appreciate, but at the same time make sure it had that 1950s sci-fi sensibility about it.
You know, that idea of recreating the spirit of classic Vegas, because that's also more of a Fallout style.
One of the things that kind of excited a lot of the artists and designers here was the ability to sort of take an amusement park city and then just play around with all the visual themes and the energy that Vegas has.
Our lead artist, Joe Sanabria, went through and started making just silhouettes of the shapes of the casinos.
We blocked out a chunk of land and started just placing individual buildings to get a feel for how big things should be.
And those are profiles that we could look at from a distance in the wasteland, and because we wanted to make sure that when you saw these things from a distance, you're like, that's the Strip. There's nothing else that's like it when you look across the desert.
While I was working on those, the artists were making proxies of those buildings, very low-res versions of them, just so that we could get an idea of how they would fit in the map.
And then once we got onto the Strip itself, we started building them up, building the details, the lights on them, looking at it during the day and at night, and then populating it to see what it looked like as a living and breathing environment.
And that's when the artists themselves pretty much take ownership of it, and it goes from my hands to theirs, and then that's when they start to do all the cool things we see in the game.
When you arrive at the Strip, it's definitely a wow moment. When you go through the gates of the Strip, you find yourself in a location that you really haven't seen anything of its like in the Fallout universe before.
We knew we wanted the player to get that feeling that you get when you go to the real Las Vegas Strip, which is, you set foot at one end of the Strip and you look down and you see like all the neon lights.
It's about kind of bringing that feeling back of those big signs that say, Dean Martin and Sinatra, playing and things like that.
We're going to examine all the different vices in human nature, spread those amongst the casinos on the Strip.
What are the main themes of Las Vegas when you go there? And, things that always come up are, luck, sleaze, luxury, organized crime.
Each casino has its own theme and its own feel, and as soon as the player goes into it, they get it.
You have the Tops, which is run by a tribe called the Chairmen, and they really harken back to the Rat Pack.
Everything about it is very Rat Pack oriented. Benny is very Rat Pack oriented, and so it has this whole theme goes throughout it.
Then you also have Gomorrah, which is run by the Emeritus, who are basically like the mob past of Vegas.
The whole point of the casino is sort of a sex sells kind of idea.
As soon as you step into the door, there are flames going up on either side of you. There's the demonic statues off in the corner.
Women dancing in cages and prostitutes literally walking around and soliciting you while you're trying to gamble.
It's also, of course, one of the most profitable casinos on the Strip, because you have a lot of servicemen from the New California Republic Army who are going to the Strip on leave.
This place smells like booze and sex. That's why I always come back.
Mr. House's casino, the Lucky 38, that has a very mausoleum feel about it intentionally. So when you go in there, you feel like you're actually walking into an ancient crypt, a part of the old world that hasn't been touched. And that's supposed to reinforce a lot of his character in that location.
We also have the Ultra Lux, which is the super ritzy casino.
Big, high dome, very nice people greeting you and being maybe a little too well-mannered with you.
I am at your service.
Ultra Lux is all known for basically being high society, and so you can kind of hobnob with the wealthy elite that do visit the Strip because they tend to stay there.
You look like you'd be more at home at one of the other hotels.
I think a big part of Vegas, no matter what time period it's gone through, each casino is trying to sort of carve out its own particular theme and niche, and it was a lot of fun coming up with those styles for the casinos, specifically in New Vegas.
You also see a lot of debauchery on the Strip, of course. You see a lot of drunken soldiers who are kind of stumbling around from casino to casino.
Walking around in drunken stupors and puking on the sidewalks and dancing naked in fountains and that sort of thing.
Securitron robots will roll out of there and patrol the Strip quietly, just day in and day out. So if you show any iron on the streets or start shooting, those guys will take you out. I think players can probably spend as much time as they want on the Strip. We have a whole series of casino games.
You can gamble on the Strip. That's the most basic thing, the reason why most of the people are there.
There's an extensive series of quest lines that go on within the city, as one might expect. Players should have plenty to do.
In the end, I think we did a really good job. The guys worked hard and were able to put things together in a way that I think is going to be entertaining for folks.
What keeps people coming back, I believe, is just good gameplay, good story. Maybe for some people, it's the amount of blood and violence that we have in the game, I don't know.
Taking a previous past and create a total new reality derived from this past. I think people are just really, it turns them on.
If you enjoyed Fallout 3, when you get into New Vegas, you're going to get a lot of shocks, you're going to get a lot of surprises, a lot of reversals, and you're going to get another classic Fallout experience.